I have 10 minutes and it will not be close to the brilliance of Michael's presentation here. And I'm focused very much on the conceptualization of democracy and the different steps. We were going from the principles of democracy towards the single indicators. Democracy barometer is a kind of failed success. It failed to compete at the very end with with quite a few of democracy indices, and it has to do with a small sample of countries, only 53 countries we were able to look at. And the period under investigation was between 1990 and 2020. And when WIDEM came along, we had discussions. We are the University of Zurich and my previous department at the Berlin Social Science Center, what to do. And then we decided we neither have this kind of financial backing and probably also not the intellectual quality of such a huge army of participants and evaluators. So we finished with the barometer, but we still think it can teach us something about successful and not so successful democracy measurements. One last point here, a main motive at the time of 2007 or 2008, why we wanted to have a democracy barometer was because at that time Freedom House and Polity were dominating the scene, and they did not show any differences among the best 30 democracies. They were all equal. Even if we really could smell at that time, there is a difference between Poland and Finland, or Hungary and Sweden. So this was one major motive. Michael was talking about we should clarify at the beginning what the concept of democracy is, and we singled out from three very simple types of democracy: the minimalists, very close to electoral democracy; a mid-range with we call liberal democracy, which is electoral democracy plus rule of law, more or less. And then we have the maximalists, those we found among theoreticians and constitutionalists during the Weimar Republic, such as Hermann Heller, or we still find among Latin American democratic theorists, meaning they look at the electoral democracy plus rule of law plus output, so to say, especially social equality in the respective countries. And here is the conceptual tree we were following. We singled out three fundamental principles of democracy in order to measure the quality of democracy. Then we deduced from these fundamental principles 9 functions. 3 principles, 9 functions, and then we stepped down from the function to components, in a 4th step to subcomponents, and the 5th step from subcomponents to indicators. And now the point comes. We did not rely, mostly at least, or we avoided to rely on expert judgments. We can discuss later on the merits and the fallacies of expert judgment. We assumed we should do something different. and avoiding subjective perceptions of certain countries. Therefore, we were looking for data already existing. Michael was rightly to some extent criticizing the term objective data, but we try to find data which fits the meaning of the indicators, and we're using more or less all data sources we could find across the globe. Here again, these are the three principles of democracy: equality and freedom. This is quite conventional. The third one is more disputable, meaning control. Here, control of those who govern. So we were embarking on a medium range concept which looks at the input and throughput factors of a political system, but not on the outcomes. And here you get a first idea how the conceptual tree works. We tried to measure the quality of democracy. We agreed on the three principles: freedom, control, equality. Then we singled out on the level of function for each of these three principles, three major components. I don't rush through all of them, but if we look at freedom, we agreed on individual liberties as a major component, and on rule of law and the public sphere. I don't reveal any secret that we have a lot of discussions where to put, let's say, public sphere under which of the three principles. This has been an ongoing discussion. So at the end, we decided to subsume those components under the three principles. And then you start from here. We have the function, individual liberty. And then here to the left and to the right, we have the components of individual liberties. And then we went down to subcomponents. And here you find the different indicators for which we were looking at data which fit the meaning of the indicators. So we did not end up with 500 or even more indicators, but at the end we had around 100. At the beginning we had indeed 400, but then we had statistical testings, and singled out more or less 100 indicators. I skipped the measurement for a while, which is quite complex and is to some extent out of my intellectual reach. This was done by our statistical experts. Now I show you at the end, two or three interesting observations and what you can do if you, so to say, measure objectively the quality of democracy, and subjective objects such as satisfaction with democracy. And what you see here is quite interesting. The blue columns are those columns measuring the quality of democracy. Here at the bottom line, typically Denmark, Sweden, and so forth are at the top of these 53 best democracies. But very often you do not have an overlapping of the satisfaction with democracy and the quality of democracy, which is quite amazing. And I don't have it here, but if you look in the 1990s at Italy, for example, so you find during the period of come on, what was the name of the prime minister at this time?
Tangentopoli?
No, 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 no. Our good friend from Milano.
Berlusconi, you mean?
Sorry, yeah, of course, Berlusconi. So if you look at the governmental years of Silvio Berlusconi, then you see all experts are judging a decline and observing a decline in the quality of democracy. But the Italian people were more and more and more and more satisfied with the Italian democracy. So the subjective satisfaction and the objective evaluation of the quality of democracy can diverge quite significantly, which allows us for some predictions and prognosis and views into the future. Here, what is clearer, if you look at the feeling of happiness and the quality of democracy, there is quite a close connection between both. And then this is the last one. We went back at that time to the famous Leibhardt question, which are the more gentle, more democratic, and even more effective democracies? And as you know, Leibhardt was very much in favor of consensus democracies. We were looking then at these, let me see. So we were looking at the different types of democracy, and indeed we were confirming from 1990 to somehow 2014 at this time, or 15, that consensus democracies were more democratic than, for example, majoritarian democracies. Now we could go back to the single principles and indicators, then you would see not all of these components show this significant difference between majoritarian and consensus democracy. This is more or less what I said before. If we go to the single principles, you see there is a clear difference between the freedom of consensual democracies and the freedom in majoritarian democracies, whereas equality is more or less the same for these two types of democracy. I come to the end. After these examples, what we can do with the quality of democracy measurements, then it would be in line if we look at specific institutional arrangements. How do they influence the quality of certain principles, of components of democracy, or even democracy as a whole? We also should discuss at our breakout session whether we can use the same indicator for the quality of democracy for Sweden and Finland on the one hand, and Nigeria, Chad, or other countries or deep autocratic regimes such as North Korea. This is something I have not seen very much discussions about it. Last point, we also should have a look whether it makes sense to look at certain regions to find clusters of democratic developments and so forth. Very, very last point, since we are talking now for 10 or more years about de-democratization or illiberalization of democracy, we should use these measurements of democracy in their different components more, which and why are they affected by illiberalization, and to which extent certain institutions or other factors are driving this illiberalization and polarization of our democracies? Thank you very much.